Welcome to another day of Mr. Mann's Anatomy and Physiology class. Hope you guys enjoy. It's going to be for Thursday, Friday, or the 12th and the 13th of this week before Thanksgiving break. Just a couple reminders before we get started with our second set of notes. Is first things first is on Thursday, Friday, we're supposed to have a quiz over the skull. That is moved to Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. Friday and Tuesday of next week, because my Tuesday, Thursday group was going to have to study over Veterans Day. So just kind of giving you a heads up on that. So for my Tuesday, Thursday group, you guys do not have to take a quiz until Tuesday of next week. Also a reminder that if you want to retake a low quiz grade over part 2 of the skeletal system study guide, we have a short quiz that we will give the first 10 minutes of class. So if you guys want to take that on your class day, whether it be Thursday or Friday of this week, make sure that you are ready to take that. Only like 6 questions. Part of it is knowing different types of fractures, osteoblast, osteocytes, all that stuff. So if you have any questions over that, please let me know, and I will get that ready for you. So this is going to kind of help you with your notes. OneDrive is not doing so hot with what we're trying to do in class, and it's not really working at the house. So, here we are making YouTube videos now, just trying to do whatever we can. So remember that our skull quiz, make sure you study those. Only study the ones you have. The only ones you have to know are on your labeling sheet that you were given on Tuesday. So make sure that you know those, and you guys will be A-okay. Matching, what is this? Matching certain parts. Know it from all angles, because this is not a practical, it's pictures. So make sure that you guys are good within that category of knowing that if I give you the posterior side of the skull, that you know that we can still see the parietal of the skull or the occipital. We can even see the occipital foramen, all those types of things, okay? So we're going to be talking about the vertebral column today. And so we have our cervical, thoracic, and lumbar spine. We're going to talk about sacral and coccyx later. But just kind of getting a head start with this. So we're going to have 26 irregular bones. They create a flexible and curved structure. There are 33 in fetal and infant vertebrae column due to our coccyx and sacrum not fusing and all of those things, because of the part of, again, they're still growing, so they're going to have more bones there. This is going to surround and protect the spinal cord, which you guys probably already remember from looking at our overview of our body systems in the first unit. So the general structure of vertebrae is we have the body. This is going to be the weight-bearing region of our vertebrae, and we'll see a picture here in a second. We have our vertebral canal, which is going to be the spinal cord passes. We also see that as what we call the vertebral foramen as well. Foramen. And this is kind of like where the occipital foramen is, where the spinal cord passes through. This is where a spinal cord is going to pass through each individual vertebrae. Now we have 7 processes that project from the typical vertebrae. So our first 3 are our spinous process. This is our posterior side of the vertebrae. So every time you see a spinous process, it's going to be the backside of the vertebrae. So it's going to be facing the backside of the person. We have our transverse process. These are extend laterally. And then we have our superior and inferior articular process. And then we have vertebrae are separated by intervertebral disc, okay? And they're cushion-like pad and act like shock absorbers. So if we want to count our processes, we said there's 7 of them. So there's 2 with the superior inferior articular processes. We have 2 transverse processes, 2 spinous processes, and then we have intervertebral disc. So looking at a typical vertebral structure here, we have our spinous process here, our transverse process, our superior articular facet or process here. We have our vertebral foramen, our body, our inferior is going to be below, and then here's our other transverse process here, and we have our other superior articular facet process over here as well. So make sure that you kind of know the typical, but we're going to talk about the individual type of vertebrae here next. And also I've labeled anterior and posterior, so I'll zoom out just a little bit. So we have our posterior side is where our spinous process is, our anterior is where our body's at. Or the weight bearing part. Okay. So within our vertebral regions, we have our cervical vertebrae, and we have 7 of them. So we call them C1 to C7. There are 7 vertebrae in the neck, and we have 2 special kinds of vertebrae here that are very, very different from the rest of the cervical vertebrae. So we have C1 is called the atlas, and the C2 is called the axis. And so if we look here, we have our C1 and C2. Our C1 is above and our C2 is below. And looking at this, on the left side, we're looking at our superior side, and on the right side, our inferior side of the vertebrae. So on the superior side, we have a anterior tubercle. Okay, there is no real body here with these because this is what's going to cause that rotation in the head. So this is why you can look over to each side of the shoulder is due to your C1, C2 vertebrae. Your skull is also going to sit on top of these superior facets here, or superior articular facets. We have our transverse foramen here. So we have a hole inside our transverse processes on either side. And we don't really have a spinous process here on the C1. We have a posterior tubercle for the sole purpose of, again, the skull sits on here. So we have our occipital processes that sit on our superior articular facets here. That's where the skull is going to rest on the C1 vertebrae. And then on our inferior side, we have, again, our transverse process labeled, and then our inferior articular facet processes as well. Then we have on our superior C2 picture, we have our spinous processes now, because this is where we start to get to look kind of normal. We have our superior articular facet, we have our body, and we have our dens here, and we have our transverse process. Now the dens is very, very interesting because of the part with our dens. Let me be able to draw here real quick. Let me draw a pen. Let me use a pen. So you guys know that I can't draw really well. So the green's going to be my C1 and I'll make a red my C2. So in the C1, if we're looking at a lateral side, okay, let's say this is my C1. It's going to have that, just messed that up. Here, erase that. Let's do here. Let's just make it a there. So that's my C1. Okay, so looking at a lateral side, this is not a really great picture, but as you see, there is a hole because there is no body within the vertebrae. Our C2 though is going to lay right below it. And this is where we're going to get our rotation. So we're going to lay right below it here, and this is where we have that dens. This dens is literally going to sit inside, or what is it? Not anterior. Anterior to the posterior tubercle. As you see this little space here, which is right here. Okay, that's where our dens is going to sit. And so what we can do is literally our C1, where our skull is. It's going to be our skull here. Let me get to here. Let me use blue for our skull. Now our dens are going to be that big, but you guys get the picture. Our skull is going to be here. Okay, now within this, our skull is able to rotate to the left and to the right on top of the C1 because there is no body there, and we can rotate over the dens. Okay, so this is very, very functional for us as people, as we're able to look at our left and the right of things that are coming at us or anything like that for survival purposes. And then let's go to here. So I still have this eraser on, but that's okay. Let me get out of this eraser. Text mode. Perfect. Okay. So we see this, okay? Now, as we look though, we see that dens, right? We see now C1 sits on top. So this is a better picture, but I want to show you that before I show you this picture, because now we can show that where we can draw going to the left, we can rotate to the left, and to the right. Flip if it's patient's point of view. Okay. Now, as you see, our C2 starts to look like all the other cervical vertebrae. However, when you get to about C4, we start to do this little transition. As you can see a little bit, our spinous processes are looking a little bit longer, okay, after about C4, right? So we see C5 right here. Our transverse process are more looking like L's, okay? And so we're going to show you what that looks like here in a minute. So within our cervical vertebrae, this is a typical cervical vertebrae, right? What this is going to look like, it's going to be looking like a C. So if you're trying to figure out on a lab practical or something like that, on how to figure out what type of vertebrae this is, if you can put your two hands together and basically make C's and put them together, okay, you're going to look at the body of the cervical vertebrae, okay. The transverse vertebrae is very little. It's not very predominant here, due to the function of what the cervical vertebrae is. And so, like, when we're looking at function, we have flexion and extension. We have lateral flexion. So lateral flexion is moving your head side to side. If I had a big transverse process here, I wouldn't be able to do that as well. Rotation, that's really due to C1, C2, and how those are made. And this is where we have the spine's greatest range of motion, is because we do not have these bony prominences limiting motion. And so what I've done is I've highlighted things that you need to know, like the body, the transverse process, the vertebral foramen. So now let's look at the thoracic vertebrae. Now, within the thoracic vertebrae, though, we're going to have a little extra attachment here. Okay, now there are 12 of them. They're going to increase in size from first to last. Okay, that articulates with a rib. So when we start at T1, that's going to be our first rib on our body. Imagine how that works, right? The vertebral foramen in a circular spinous process is large and points downward. The transverse and spinous processes form a W. So if you take your fingers and you make two L's and you put your thumb at about a 45-degree angle and you cross them like that, you cross your two index fingers and you have your thumbs on your thigh, they're going to make W's. Okay, that's what our thoracic vertebrae is going to look like. Okay, so we have our body here. We have our rib head, so this is our whole rib. We have our transverse process, our spinous process here. Now, one of the cool things about the ribs within the thoracic vertebrae is this is going to be where our superior articular process and facets are with these ribs. Okay, they're going to combine with those, and then the transverse process, okay, is going to also support the rib as well. So as you see, the transverse process here is supporting the rib here, and then this is going to be where our superior articular process occurs with the rib head, where they combine. And of course, I've highlighted what you need to know here within your thoracic vertebrae. So don't stress on all the other, like the lamina, the superior costal facet, and the pedicle, all that stuff. If you need to know those, we'll talk about them. But right now, all I need you to know is these highlighted portions. Okay? And then we have, last but not least, we have our lumbar vertebrae. So this is going to be L1 to L5. So a good way to remember our cervical to thoracic to lumbar vertebrae is times that you eat. So, you know, when you think of like times you eat, usually it's like, now, not during school time because we start at school at 7, but usually it's like 7, 12, and 5. So 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae. Okay? Now, our lumbar vertebrae, let me backtrack real quick. The thoracic vertebrae real quick deals with a lot of rotation, as you could probably figure that out. Lateral flexion, possible but restricted by these ribs. So we have those bony prominences that not allow those lateral flexions. We have flexion and extension, but it's limited due to all this space and all these things out here. Because if I go straight into extension, or I arch my back, at my mid back, I'm pulling all these ribs at my sternum, which doesn't feel good. So in the lumbar vertebrae, we have 5 lumbar vertebrae in the low back. These are weight bearing and receive the most stress. So when you look at like spinal fusions or anything like that, they're going to be happening in the lumbar vertebrae here. Now the spinous processes are going to be short and flat. Our vertebral foramen is in a triangle. And the articular processes lock the vertebrae together. These are large bodies. Now our transverse and spinal process form an L on either side at a right angle. So if you do, again, that little the finger and thumb, and you just turn it over on your index fingers and your thumbs are at 90 degrees, that is going to be what a lumbar vertebrae looks like. Okay? These transverse processes go straight out at about a 90-degree angle from the spinous process. And so what I've done here is I've also highlighted the things that you need to know of these. See how these are very, very thick. They're very, very sturdy, and they interlock together with the anterior process facet with the superior and inferior vertebral notch. These are very, very sturdy because they're going to hold the majority of our weight. This is what it's going to take a lot of our force as we're doing things within our bodies here. So as we see here, these are very, very thick. You see our intervertebral disc here. These are very, very important. You see these a lot thicker in our lumbar vertebrae. You also deal with a lot of herniated disc within our lumbar vertebrae as well. So as healthcare professionals, when you look at later in life, as you're working on the job, and someone's having a real bad pain and it's in certain positions, it's due to the intervertebral disc. Now, we haven't really talked about the intervertebral disc, so here's some free information for you to kind of help you get started. This is a jelly-like structure that supports, made of fiber cartilage, that supports the 2 vertebrae above and below. It gives it space, allows it to move, gives those nerve endings to go out so that you feel good. You're able to have those contractions when needed. What happens is with these bulging discs, what's going to happen is basically the jelly structure is going to either sit in front of the spine or in the back of the spine. Is going to be basically pinched, which is causing pressure on the nerve endings. And so what you see a lot of times is if someone feels better when they flex their, or they bend forward or flex their lumbar spine, okay, they probably have a pinched nerve and extension. It makes it feel better, okay? And so what you got to start doing is start to let them work their way back into extension to get them neutral, okay? And again, it's the opposite. So if they feel better in extension, okay, they probably have that pinched disc or that intervertebral disc inflection. So you got to start working them and getting back to neutral inflection. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of stress, and it's very, very painful. So be able to work with your patients in that capacity. And then, of course, for the last 2, we have our sacrum vertebrae and our coccyx vertebrae. So looking at our whole spine here, we have our anterior side here on our posterior side. We see our cervical vertebrae here, what they look like. This is going to be our thoracic vertebrae, and then our lumbar vertebrae here. As you see, our spinous processes here, as they are vertebral bodies as well. Vertebral bodies get bigger, spinous processes get longer. And see this natural curve within the body. Okay. We have a thoracic curve, a cervical curve, and a lumbar curve. We even have a sacral curve as well. And the coccyx is just 4, and they're fused, and so is the cervical, and so is the sacral. And so one of the things you also see is, like, for instance, athletes who have neck surgeries. For instance, Peyton Manning, he had a forward neck. What they're now actually really calling it is the Peyton Manning injury. And so basically is what's happening is this cervical curve, let me choose a different color, I'm going to do it in green since there's a blue background there. Instead of being like this where the head sits on it, it looks more like this, what we call a forward neck. And you can see that with a lot of patients. For instance, I have a forward neck. And then our transverse vertebrae here, or not transverse, our thoracic vertebrae here has a natural curve. It goes into this motion. Okay? Or a slight lordosis. And then in our lumbar vertebrae, we have a slight kyphosis. So looking at this, sorry I flipped those. Thoracic would be a kyphosis, and the lumbar would be a lordosis. Okay, but you don't see those unless there's extreme cases. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the sacrum and the coccyx here. So our sacrum, we have 5 fused vertebrae. These are our triangle vertebrae articulated with the hip bones, and our coccyx is part of our tailbone that we saw in class that one day, looking at as an irregular bone. And this consists of 3 to 5 fused vertebrae, so we average at about 4. Okay. And so we have some homeostatic imbalances here. So we have scoliosis, abnormal rotation of the spine resulting in a lateral curvature. So scoliosis is going to look something like this. And so a lot of times you see, and this is from a posterior side, so you're looking at the patient's back. A lot of times though, so you'll see is when a patient bends over, you'll see some rib heads sitting higher on one side and then the other, and then flipping it on the other side. So you would see rib heads higher on this side and this side if you're looking at a patient. Kyphosis, this is going to be a dorsally exaggerated thoracic curvature or a hunchback. So you see this in a lot of older population. Their spine is literally going to look like this. They're basically going to have a flat low back. Okay, where that most of the time these patients are bent over. You see this again with a lot of older patients. My grandmother had kyphosis. And then within lordosis, there's going to be an extenuated lumbar curvature or a sway back. Okay, I actually both have a kyphosis and a lordosis, not to the same extreme as a lot of patients. So mine would look like this. I have like a frontal neck, like a front neck, and then I go into lordosis, and then kyphosis is here, and then I go into my sacrum and coccyx. Okay, and basically it looks like, they're trying to stick their butt out. That would be a lordosis. So looking at our coccyx here, we have a sacral canal, we have our bodies, we have our ala, transverse ridges, the body of the first sacral vertebrae, and then we have our coccyx down here with the apex where we have our 4 fused together here. And our apex is going to be that division between our sacrum and coccyx here. Within this, you can see the bodies of each different vertebrae within the sacrum. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's going to be separated by these things called transverse ridges. Okay. And then, of course, we have our facets to our superior articular process. We have our lateral sacral crest, our medial sacral crest, so lateral outside, medial middle. So these are very, very important for us as these articulate with our hip bones, as you can see here within our alas. Okay, and this is my anterior side and my posterior side. So you can feel your posterior going down into your buttocks. On the posterior side, you can start feeling this medial crest. And then last but not least, we have some fetal spine curvatures. And only in thoracic and sacral curvatures are well developed at birth, called our primary curvatures. And these are convex posteriorly, and the infant spine arches are like a 4-legged animal. Okay, so we have that big old hump. Okay, we have our secondary curvatures is in the cervical and lumbar, which are convex anteriorly and associated with a child's development. So we have that anterior neck curve and the anterior sacral curve, or lumbar curve. Sorry. And so then we have cervical curvatures that present before birth but are not pronounced until the baby starts to lift its head at about 3 months. So that's where we get a lot of our cervical curves, is being able to develop those muscles again, that spine to move back, because again, we're not really fully developed yet. Then our lumbar curve really develops at about 12 months when we get up and start walking, and the weight starts to begin to distribute throughout the body. And in this case, our trunk over the body center of gravity, providing balance when we stand up. Okay? And so there's a cute little baby. Aww. And so that's going to be it for today. We're going to talk about thoracic cages later. So make sure you guys watch this, fill out your notes. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.